Attention! If you or someone you care about is living with tinnitus and/or vertigo from Meniere's disease, this video, along with the upcoming video on vertigo, may be two of the most important videos you ever watch on YouTube. Let me be very clear up front. I'm not selling anything. This is not medical advice, and this is not just another video explaining tinnitus by someone who has never actually lived with it. And no, snapping your fingers behind your head is not going to fix tinnitus. I honestly thought that video was a joke too. This video comes from real experience. A former chronic tinnitus and vertigo sufferer, sometimes dealing with both at the same time. If you've been there, you know how brutal that double hit can be. What I'm sharing comes from years of living through it, not theory, not clickbait, and not false promises. If this condition has taken control of your life, or someone you love is struggling, keep watching. The next point I want to make absolutely clear is this. Tinnitus is not 100% curable in all cases. Regardless of what any book out there claims, promises, or suggests, and regardless of what any video or online source may say, those accounts do not reflect the full reality. What follows is not theory, speculation, or secondhand information. It is the unfiltered truth from someone who has lived with these conditions for decades. Much of what is published or promoted in books and videos often oversimplifies, minimizes, or misrepresents the long-term impact and daily reality of these issues. My experience is based on years of first-hand exposure, diagnosis, and ongoing consequences, something no summary, tutorial, or testimonial can fully capture. What I am sharing comes from direct, lived experience, not from promises of outcomes or generalized claims. It represents the realities that only time, persistence, and personal endurance can reveal. Depending on the cause, some types of tinnitus may be temporary or improve with treatment, while chronic tinnitus, like mine, are often permanent. However, even when it can't be cured, identifying the underlying condition can make tinnitus more manageable and less noticeable. To keep this video focused and to the point, I won't be covering how I eliminated my vertigo from Meniere's disease. That will be in the next video. Instead, this video is dedicated to my experience as a former chronic tinnitus sufferer and how I was able to reduce the constant, life-altering ringing in my ears by 97%. This video is about sharing real-life experience, hard-earned insight, and practical hope. Nothing more and nothing less. My goal is to pass along what I learned and, if possible, help you find meaningful relief as well. Through years of trial and error, I was able to identify the primary root cause of my chronic tinnitus, which severely impacted my physical and emotional well-being for nearly 2 years. Dramatically reduce my ringing in my ears in under 90 days once I understood what was actually triggering it and what I had been doing wrong. Regain control of my life using an approach I hadn't seen discussed elsewhere, without relying on medications, sound therapies, or risky surgical procedures. Maintain a happy, active life that has remained 97% tinnitus-free for over 28 years now. Let's begin. First, what is tinnitus? Quick explanation. Tinnitus is the perception of sound when there's no external sound source. Most people describe it as ringing, buzzing, hissing, or clicking in their ears. It isn't a disease on its own. It's a symptom of something else going on. In simple terms, your brain is hearing sounds that aren't actually coming from the outside world. So why does this happen? Let's break it down in a straightforward way. The most common causes. 1. Hearing loss. This is the most common cause of tinnitus. As we age or after years of exposure to loud noise, the tiny sound-sensing cells in the inner ear can be damaged. When that happens, the brain sometimes tries to fill in the gaps, and that can show up as ringing. Age-related and noise-induced hearing loss are very common triggers, but they're not the only ones. 2. Loud or prolonged noise exposure. Repeated exposure to loud music, concerts, heavy machinery, or high-volume headphones can damage the inner ear and trigger tinnitus, sometimes permanently. 3. Ear or head injuries. Injuries to the ear, head, or neck can interfere with how sound signals travel to the brain, which may also result in tinnitus. 4. Earwax buildup. Excess earwax can block normal sound input. When that happens, the brain may overcompensate, leading to ringing or other phantom sounds. 5. Certain medications. Some medications, such as specific antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, or pain relievers, can cause tinnitus or make it worse in some people. Health conditions linked to tinnitus. 6. Blood vessel issues. Changes in blood flow near the ear can cause a pulsing or heartbeat-like sound, known as pulsatile tinnitus. 7. Meniere's disease. This inner ear disorder can cause tinnitus along with vertigo, balance problems, and hearing changes. This is the condition that explained my tinnitus. Final thoughts. As you can see, tinnitus has many possible causes, and identifying the right one is often the key to managing it effectively. If ringing in your ears doesn't go away or starts getting worse, don't ignore it. Talking with a healthcare professional can be an important first step towards understanding what's really going on. How years as a DJ led to Meniere's disease and permanent hearing loss. I was only 23 years old when diagnosed with Meniere's disease and permanent hearing loss following many years of prolonged and repeated exposure to high levels of noise while working as a professional DJ during the late 1980s through the early 1990s. During that period, I was routinely exposed to extremely loud music and sound equipment for extended durations, often without adequate hearing protection. At the time, it was not mandatory for loudspeakers or sound equipment to carry warning labels regarding the risk of hearing damage from prolonged or excessive noise exposure. As a result of my own ignorance and lack of information, I was unaware of the long-term risks associated with sustained high-decibel sound levels and did not have sufficient guidance or protection to prevent auditory injury. Over time, this repeated overexposure caused cumulative damage to my auditory system, leading to progressive hearing loss and the development of permanent tinnitus. I also began experiencing symptoms consistent with Meniere's disease, including episodes of vertigo, aural fullness, fluctuating hearing levels, and persistent ringing in the ears. These conditions are permanent and have significantly affected my daily life, communication abilities, and overall quality of life. Medical evaluations have confirmed my hearing loss and tinnitus are consistent with noise-induced auditory damage sustained during my years of professional DJ work. The beginning of my tinnitus journey. One day after a long night of work, I was out with a few friends at a music store in New York City called Sam Ash. At one point, I leaned down to pick something up. The moment I stood back up, I knew something was wrong. The entire store started spinning. It felt like I was trapped inside a blender spinning in slow motion. I had never experienced anything like it before. I told my friends I needed to sit down because I suddenly felt dizzy. I tried shaking my head, and after about 15 minutes, the spinning eased enough for things to finally stop. We stayed in the store for nearly 2 hours, surrounded by loud music and noise. When I headed home, I felt lightheaded and disoriented. What I didn't know at the time was that I had just experienced my very first vertigo attack. And along with it came something else, a constant ringing in my ears. Over the next few days, I noticed the ringing never went away. At first, I didn't think much of it. I went back to work and carried on like normal, completely unaware that my life was already taking a very different turn. Within a few weeks, that faint ringing turned into a loud, high-pitched noise. Then it escalated, periodically spiking into unbearable levels. Within a month, what started as a mild nuisance had become something that was completely changing my life. Some days it felt like my head was going to explode. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape the sound. Days were difficult, but nights were unbearable. The lack of sleep quickly took its toll. A visit to my primary care doctor only raised more concern.
After I explained what happened at the music store and the near fainting episode, he told me I needed to see a neurologist immediately. What followed was an exhausting series of tests. Appointments with my primary doctor, a neurologist, an audiologist, a psychiatrist, MRIs, and everything in between. Eventually, there was a diagnosis: Meniere's disease. I had never even heard of it before. Not only did I have Meniere's disease, but I also had everything that came with it: tinnitus and vertigo. Then the neurologist said something that left me stunned. At the time, very little was known about the condition. There was no cure, limited treatment options, and I was told I would simply have to live with it. I remember thinking to myself, how am I supposed to live like this? My long, frustrating battle with tinnitus.
After my diagnosis, my dreams of becoming a musician were put on hold. The first 2 years living with Meniere's disease, along with severe tinnitus and vertigo at the same time, were beyond anything I can properly describe. Unless you've lived with even one of these conditions, it's almost impossible to understand how much they take from you. Living with all three at once, there are simply no words. My life stopped being enjoyable. I couldn't work with that level of noise constantly screaming in my ears. It became impossible to cope with myself, let alone anything else. I grew short-tempered and irritable, even with my own family. The extreme sleep deprivation caused by tinnitus alone is enough to push anyone to the edge. But when you add nonstop stress and anxiety, it eventually led me into severe depression. A couple of months after my diagnosis, I went back to my neurologist and explained just how unbearable my situation had become. He prescribed several medications: diuretics, anti-anxiety drugs, muscle relaxers, antidepressants, and recommended noise masking, also known as white noise. None of it helped, not even a little. At my next visit, about a month later, he mentioned one final option, strictly as a last resort, given how severe my condition was. It was auditory nerve surgery. Hearing that stopped me cold. He explained that tinnitus surgery doesn't always work, and worse, it causes irreversible damage. The procedure involves cutting a nerve in the auditory system. There's no guarantee we'll eliminate tinnitus, and it results in 100% permanent deafness in the affected ear. I decided the risk wasn't worth it, and to this day, I'm incredibly grateful I made that decision. As the weeks went by and I tried just about everything imaginable, I noticed something strange. My affected ear became extremely sensitive to everyday sounds, normal, external noise. Suddenly, even small noises around me felt overwhelming and painful. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I had stopped all prescription medications by then. The tinnitus itself wasn't necessarily getting louder. It was changing how I perceived sound because of this new hypersensitivity. The ringing was still relentless, with some days reaching 75 decibels or more. And through all of this, I was still dealing with severe vertigo attacks. But about a month after this extreme sound sensitivity began, something unexpected happened. At night, the tinnitus was still brutal, but during the day, some days, the ringing was deafening, and other days it dropped dramatically, sometimes by a huge margin. That contrast caught my attention. I was at the lowest point of my life. I honestly didn't know what my future looked like. But one day, lying there and thinking about why some days were better than others, I had an idea, one that would ultimately change my life. I decided to start a daily activities journal. From the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, I tracked everything: what I did, what I ate, how I felt, where I went, noise levels during travel, how I got there, weather conditions, temperature, everything. Most importantly, I recorded my tinnitus levels every 2 hours throughout the day and noted whether I felt dizzy or experienced vertigo. But before I could do that properly, I had to address the extreme noise sensitivity in my ear. I needed some kind of sound protection, but not something obvious or uncomfortable. I didn't want to walk around in public wearing giant earmuffs.
I tried all kinds of earplugs, but they sealed the ear too tightly, creating pressure like getting off a long flight. Worse, they aggravated my vertigo. Just moving my jaw to talk or eat created a suction effect on my eardrum. I even tried a piece of foam from an old pillow. Close, but not quite right. Then one day, my wife was doing her nails. I remember the smell of nail polish and acetone, and I noticed a few cotton balls sitting in front of her. This was 28 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. As I looked at the cotton balls, it was like a light bulb went off. I thought, that might be exactly what I need. Something that gently filters sound, doesn't seal the ear completely, is barely noticeable, and doesn't create pressure on the eardrum. I tore off a small piece of cotton, about the size of an M&M. I placed it in my ear and adjusted it until it felt comfortable. After wearing it for several days, changing it regularly, it was clear this was working. It filtered harsh external noise and gave my hypersensitive ear some relief. That alone felt amazing. The trade-off was that the tinnitus sounded louder because external noise was reduced, but I had no choice. The sound sensitivity was worse than the tinnitus, and that was the turning point. At that point, I knew it was time to take action and fully commit to the journal idea. Days turned into weeks, and I wrote down everything I could remember about each day: what I did, what I ate, how I felt, and what my symptoms were like. After about 3 weeks of wearing my homemade noise filter every single day, I noticed something interesting. The tinnitus was still very much present and extremely loud most days, but on some nights, the volume was noticeably lower. Things stay like that for a while. When you're forced to live with a chronic condition, your body tries to adapt even when it's painful. Your brain attempts to block out the noise and pretend it's not there. But anyone who has lived with severe tinnitus knows how hard that really is. This kind of suffering is something you can only truly understand if you've experienced it yourself. After about a month and a half of journaling, finally, a strange pattern began to appear. I was tracking everything, not just tinnitus, but vertigo as well, although I won't get into the vertigo side in this video. It's fair to say I didn't find the solution to my vertigo in this journal. What I noticed was this. 2 days after eating a certain type of daily diet, my tinnitus levels would spike dramatically and stay extremely loud for 4 or 5 days straight. On other occasions, after eating a different type of diet, 2 days later, my tinnitus levels were noticeably lower. That caught my attention. At that point, it was the only consistent pattern I had, so I decided to focus on it. I didn't change anything right away. I just observed them more closely. I started closer monitoring my diet, even though I had no idea what, if anything, needed to change. And honestly, when you're young, most people don't pay much attention to diet at all. I certainly didn't. Over the next month and a half of close monitoring, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Foods high in sodium were dramatically increasing my tinnitus levels. Every time I ate fast food or meals high in sodium, my tinnitus would skyrocket for days. And when I ate foods with much lower sodium content, 2 days later, my tinnitus levels dropped significantly. Just about all fast food is high in sodium, and if you really look closely, most prepared foods are high in sodium. Most people don't notice it because their bodies adapt to it, but when sodium starts triggering a medical condition, you're forced to rethink everything. That meant learning a new way of eating, a healthier, low-sodium diet. At first I thought, this should be easy. It wasn't. Changing how you eat after years of habits is a challenge, but the choice was clear. I committed to a healthier, low-sodium lifestyle. What happened next still feels unreal to this day. Within 2 months of changing my diet, about 80% of my tinnitus was gone. By the end of the 3rd month, it was reduced by roughly 97%. Even in complete silence at night, I could barely notice it, and for the first time in a long time, I started sleeping again. It was life-changing. Although I still experience vertigo from time to time, the constant tension, anxiety, agitation, and exhaustion that had dominated nearly 2 years of my life were finally gone. This happened 28 years ago, and it has remained the same ever since. I still use my homemade noise filter as a protective measure, and yes, I'll occasionally splurge on pizza, but very rarely. Over the years, I've spoken with many people who live with tinnitus. Our conversations come naturally, and I share my personal journey, what I went through, what I tried, and what ultimately brought meaningful change after years of struggling with the condition. Months later, many of them reached out to me to express their gratitude, telling me that what helped me also brought them significant relief and has also changed their lives for the better. While complete 100% resolution isn't common and isn't always realistic, I believe meaningful improvement absolutely is. In my own case, due to irreversible partial hearing loss, I don't expect total silence, and I've made peace with that. Reaching a 97% improvement, however, has been life-changing, and helping others move closer to that level of relief has been deeply rewarding. I truly hope this video has helped you learn something from my experience, whether that's understanding tinnitus a little better, recognizing patterns you may not have noticed yet, or simply realizing that you're not alone in this journey. If even one part of my journey helps you see your situation differently or gives you hope that improvement is possible, then sharing this has been worth it. Thank you for watching, and I genuinely wish you the very best on your own path forward.